I should have known something was wrong the moment my son suggested a father-son bonding trip deep into the wilderness of Alaska, but I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that somewhere under the years of resentment, entitlement, and cold silences, the boy I raised was still in there. I just never expected him to look me in the eyes, smile, and say, "You'll figure it out, Dad, if the Grizzlies don't get you first," before driving off and leaving me 30 miles from the nearest human being, alone, unarmed, and without supplies. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. It helps more than you know, and trust me, you're going to want to hear how this one ends. Because while my son expected the wilderness to swallow me whole, what he didn't expect was that I'd return not just alive, but ready. Ready with evidence. Ready with a plan. Ready to face the man who thought he could murder his own father and walk away a millionaire. What you're about to hear isn't just a story of betrayal. It's about survival, awakening, and a level of clarity only found when the people you love try to bury you in silence. And the best part? When he walked into that motel room expecting an empty bed and a police report, I was already sitting there, waiting, smiling, and holding a legal document that would undo everything he thought he'd gain. When the front door slammed open that rainy Thursday evening, it wasn't the sound that startled me, it was the energy. Tyler didn't enter like a son coming home. He stormed in like a man on a deadline, hoodie soaked from the Seattle drizzle, sneakers squeaking across the hardwood I installed myself 10 years ago. "I need $7,000. Tonight," he said, skipping any semblance of greeting. I was still at my desk, pen in hand, reviewing invoices from the north garage. His voice hit me like a sucker punch. Not pleading, not embarrassed demanding. I looked up slowly, trying to process the gall. "Tyler, what?" I asked, blinking as if I misheard. "7,000. Today. I've already burned through last week's transfer. Rent's due. Insurance. Food." He started pacing like a caged animal, the agitation rolling off him in waves. "I already sent you your monthly support," I said, keeping my tone even. $3,000, Tyler. You're 28. You need a steady job, not another handout." That's when he exploded. "A steady job? Are you serious right now? While you're sitting on a fortune, pretending you're some noble war vet turned mechanic, you control everything like some pathetic king guarding his little empire. The garages, the house, the accounts. I'm supposed to wait until you die to live?" His words didn't just hurt, they revealed something I hadn't wanted to admit. Tyler wasn't just angry. He'd done the math. He saw my death as a transaction, a necessary milestone to cash in on the life he thought he deserved. My chest went tight, but I stood tall, Navy posture returning instinctively. "I didn't give you everything just to raise a man who resents me," I said quietly. His expression flickered for a moment, hesitation, or maybe regret, but it passed like a shadow. "After you're gone, I'll take over your shops and run them better than you ever could," he said, jaw clenched. It wasn't grief, it wasn't frustration, it was cold ambition. That's what broke me. Not the amount, not the disrespect, but the realization that this boy, the one I'd held during Elaine's funeral, the one I promised her I'd protect and raise into a man she'd be proud of, was calculating my death like an entry in QuickBooks. I didn't speak. I couldn't. And when he saw the horror on my face, Tyler turned and left. No apology, no backtracking, just a slammed door and the screech of tires disappearing into the night. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the family photo on the mantel seemed to shudder. Elaine's smile behind the glass looked too bright, too innocent. I stared at it for a long time, paralyzed. Then something inside me shifted. I'd spent 2 decades trying to fill a mother-shaped hole in his life with money, with comfort, with every soft decision I thought would heal us. But in doing so, I'd taught him the wrong lessons. That love could be bought. That failure didn't come with consequences. That inheritance was his to take, not to earn. The worst part? I thought I was doing the right thing. That night, I didn't sleep. I pulled out old photo albums, ones I hadn't opened in years, and turned each page like I was flipping through court evidence. There he was at private school, tuition I could barely afford. At Berkeley, in his $48,000 a year dorm with the new laptop he needed. Graduation with his brand new Subaru, because he said used cars were for losers. Every photo documented another compromise, another blind act of hope. And in his eyes, every time I saw the same emptiness. Not joy, not gratitude, just expectation, as if love was a monthly transaction. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue, I wasn't going to beg, but if my son wanted to treat my life like a chessboard, then I was done being the pawn. I'd spent 20 years providing. Now, I'd start protecting. From him. Sunday morning came wrapped in gray Seattle fog, the kind that clings to windows and thoughts alike. I hadn't touched my coffee. Instead, I sat at my desk again, the same one where Tyler had thrown his demands like stones into still water. My hands shook slightly as I reached for a yellow legal pad. Muscle memory from the Navy took over measured breath, spine straight, emotions in check. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a strategist. I had to think ahead, to plan for things I never wanted to imagine, not just for my protection, but for what little legacy Elaine and I still had left. I opened the drawer and pulled out the draft of my will, the one I'd updated 3 weeks prior in a haze of disappointment. At the time, it had felt like a bitter overreaction. Now, it felt prophetic. Everything was already signed, ready, just waiting to be filed. The assets, the shops, the house, all redirected to causes I believed in. A wildlife conservation trust, a veterans assistance fund, and a scholarship in Elaine's name for children who'd lost a parent. Nothing to Tyler, not a cent. I stared at the signature on the bottom line and whispered aloud, "He'll never see this coming." The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts like a blade. I saw his name before I heard his voice. Tyler. I hesitated, some old instinct, some stubborn hope that maybe he'd called to apologize, to step back from the edge. I answered, "Hello, son." His voice on the other end was different. Too bright, too rehearsed. "Hey, Dad, how's your weekend going?" There it was, fake cheer so thick it clanged like cheap silverware. "This is unexpected," I said carefully, "especially after what you said last week." "Yeah, look, I've been thinking," he replied, already accelerating. I was way out of line. "I'm sorry. I want to make things right between us. And I have an idea. A trip. Just us. You remember that time we went camping when I was 12? Up in the Cascades? You taught me how to find deer tracks. You said the woods bring out the truth in a man. What if we did something like that again? You and me. No distractions. Just nature." I didn't respond immediately. My stomach turned. "Where are we talking about?" "Alaska," he said. "Denali. I already have everything booked, flights, gear, permits. It's all covered, but it expires tomorrow. My buddy's bailed. Come with me instead." I closed my eyes. Every word out of his mouth was polished like a pitch deck. Too prepared. Too desperate. "When's the flight?" I asked. "The 18th of March. That's tomorrow. We fly into Anchorage, then drive north. 5 days in the wilderness, just like old times. 5 days." I said the words slowly, letting them hang in the air like bait. "Dad, come on. Let's fix what's broken." His voice dipped into false sincerity again, trying to appeal to some version of me that used to crave reconciliation. I glanced over at the will, still open on my desk. I thought about Elaine's smile, frozen behind glass on the mantel. Then I made my decision. "All right," I said, voice steady. "Let's do it." There was a beat of silence, then his excitement surged. "Seriously?" "Yes. I'll text you all the details. Meet me at SeaTac tomorrow, gate B6. This is going to be amazing, Dad. I promise." The call ended. I sat perfectly still, the phone buzzing once in my hand before falling silent. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, then looked at the documents still spread across the desk. I reached for a folder and carefully tucked everything into the inside pocket of my travel bag. I wasn't going to Alaska for the view. I was going to see just how far my son was willing to go. And if he really thought the wilderness would bury me, he'd forgotten one thing. I've been through war. I've survived worse terrain. And this time, I wasn't walking in blind. This time, I was ready. 3 days later, I was standing in line at SeaTac Airport with a travel bag slung over my shoulder and legal documents pressed flat against my spine like armor. Tyler spotted me before I saw him. He waved from gate B6, that same too-wide grin plastered across his face, a rehearsed version of warmth he hadn't shown in years. "Perfect timing, Dad," he called out, bouncing slightly on his heels like a kid about to board his first roller coaster. They just called our group. I studied him closely. His backpack looked new, tags still fluttering on the zippers. No signs of wear, no dust, no stains, not even a scuff. "You seem excited," I said, letting the words carry weight. He laughed lightly, but his eyes twitched a tiny, involuntary tick near the left lid. I'd seen that before, in interrogation rooms, in combat zones. The flicker of a nervous man trying to look confident. "Why wouldn't I be? Father-son adventure in the last frontier," he said, adjusting the straps on his bag with forced casualness. "When's the last time we did something like this?" Never, I thought. Not since Elaine died. Not since he stopped looking at me like I was a dad and started seeing a walking ATM. On the flight, he talked more than I'd heard from him in years. About photography, about fresh air, about reconnecting. His phone was in his hand constantly, fingers swiping across the screen even while pretending to listen. I shared a few Navy stories how to navigate without GPS, red cloud movement, identify edible moss. Tyler scribbled notes on a cocktail napkin, nodding eagerly, pretending to absorb everything. But the admiration in his voice felt hollow, like flattery dipped in calculation. During our layover, he disappeared 3 times for long bathroom breaks, each time returning with a slightly more urgent air. Through the window, I watched him pacing outside a coffee shop, talking fast into his phone, posture stiff and hunched. I didn't ask questions. I just logged every movement like I would on a reconnaissance patrol. The second flight carried us over jagged mountain ranges that cut into the horizon like broken teeth. Tyler pressed his face to the window, feigning awe, but his reflection in the glass betrayed him tight jaw, clenched teeth, a twitch in his cheek. We landed in Anchorage to a wall of cold air and the sharp scent of snow. He insisted on handling the gear rental. At the outfitters, he chose oddly specific items. Industrial rope, flare guns, emergency rations, far beyond what 2 people needed for a 5-day trip. The clerk, a grizzled man with eyes like ice, raised an eyebrow as we checked out. "Planning to get lost out there?" "Just want to be prepared," Tyler replied quickly, too quickly. We drove north on Highway 3, snow-covered peaks flanking us like silent sentinels. The trees thickened with every mile. Cell service dropped off. Road signs grew scarcer. "Beautiful country," I said, half to myself. "Yeah," he murmured, "really isolated." There it was again, that flicker of satisfaction he couldn't quite hide. We stopped for gas in a town that barely qualified as one. While I filled the tank, he ducked into the convenience store. Through the glass, I saw him on the phone again, voice low, eyes darting. When he returned, I asked lightly, "Everything okay?" "Just checking the weather. Storm might roll in." Another lie. I'd already seen the forecast. 3 days of perfect conditions. By the time we reached Denali's entrance, night had started to fall. The motel looked like something from a postcard, rustic, inviting, logs stacked perfectly, fireplaces crackling behind lobby windows. Tyler beamed. "See? Exactly like the brochure." The front desk clerk handed us our keys with a knowing look. "Trail recommendations are in the folder. Be careful this time of year, wilderness gets real quiet out there." Tyler grabbed the maps, scanning them with a level of interest that felt exaggerated. "Toklat Canyon," he said. "Backcountry." Total immersion. The ranger on duty, a woman named Megan Liu, raised both eyebrows. "That's advanced terrain." "You sure?" "We're experienced," Tyler said quickly before I could answer. "My dad was Navy, survival expert." She looked at me, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Even experts disappear out there. No cell coverage. No other hikers this time of year. Grizzlies have been spotted near that route." She pointed to red markers on the map. "Mother with 2 cubs, wolves nearby, and the moose are unpredictable when they're territorial." I nodded. "Understood." Tyler signed the liability waivers without flinching. I watched his pen move with precision. This wasn't impulsive. This had been planned. Carefully, deliberately. He rented 2 bear-resistant food containers and an emergency beacon, but seemed oddly uninterested in the demonstration. I insisted on renting a defensive rifle, a Remington 870. The weight of it in my hands felt oddly comforting. Tyler looked nervous. "Is that really necessary?" "In bear country?" Always, I replied. We loaded the truck. GPS coordinates programmed. Final trailhead locked. As we drove away from the ranger station, Megan's voice echoed in my mind. Even experts disappear out there. Tyler looked over at me. Still sure about this route? Are you? I asked back. His grin was a fraction too wide. No turning back now, right, Dad? The phrase didn't sound like encouragement. It sounded like closure. The forest swallowed us whole. Trees grew so thick they blocked the last slivers of sunlight. Snow began to fall, light and lazy, but cold enough to bite. GPS signal faded. Phone bars vanished. By the time we parked near a weather-worn trail post labeled Canyon Mile Zero, the world had gone quiet. Tyler shouldered his brand-new backpack, already wincing under the weight. God, this thing's heavy. Proper packing takes practice, I said, adjusting his strap. He flinched slightly. Right shoulder an injury he hadn't mentioned. Curious. We crossed into the wilderness together, but only one of us was planning to come back. And it wasn't him. Not yet. The first few miles of trail were blanketed in silence. No engine noise, no other voices. Just the rhythmic crunch of our boots in the snow and the low whistle of wind through spruce trees so tall they swallowed the sky. The trail narrowed quickly, forcing us single file. I let Tyler lead. He tried to hide how winded he was, pausing every 10 minutes to check the map, though we hadn't veered off the marked path. His pack sagged awkwardly to one side, poorly loaded, straps biting into his shoulders. How much farther? He called over his shoulder after our second hour. We've gone maybe 5 miles, I said. We'll set camp before dark. His breath came shallow and quick, but he nodded like he agreed. Beneath that, I could see it, the anxiety, the flickers of uncertainty he hadn't planned for. He was learning in real time that the wild doesn't bend to ego. We found a clearing by a partially frozen stream, good elevation, clear sight lines, fresh water nearby. I marked out the perimeter from habit. Cooking area downwind, food canisters hoisted on high branches, emergency supplies sorted within reach. Tyler fumbled with his tent for 20 minutes before muttering, "Can you help me?" He held out a mess of tangled guidelines like someone surrendering. I knelt beside him and showed him how to anchor properly, how to test wind resistance. For a moment it felt almost normal, like teaching him to tie his first knot in Cub Scouts. He even smiled once, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not anymore. As night settled in, we sat by a fire that crackled and hissed over wet wood. Stars emerged clearer than I'd seen in years, unmarred by the haze of city life. I stirred a pot of rehydrated stew while Tyler stared into the flames, uncharacteristically quiet. "You remember that trip to Mount Rainier?" I asked. Elaine packed enough trail mix for an army. He chuckled softly. She insisted on bringing marshmallows, even though we both knew I'd just light them on fire and wave them around like a maniac. He was still looking into the fire when he spoke again, voice softer. "She loved those trips, said the woods brought out the best in us." She was right, I replied, feeling the ache of her absence like an old fracture. Then Tyler asked something that caught me off guard. "What was your childhood like? Before the Navy? Before the shops? Before all this?" It wasn't the kind of question he usually asked. Not curious, more like a probe, searching for leverage. "Still," I answered. I told him about growing up poor in rural Idaho, working summers on hay farms, saving every dollar. About sleeping in basements, washing clothes in creek water, buying my first boots with tips from sweeping parking lots. "That kind of life," I said, "builds calluses in places you can't see." He nodded slowly. "Sounds hard?" But there was no admiration in his voice, just analysis, like he was piecing together a puzzle. "Guess I'm lucky I never had to go through all that," he added. I didn't respond. Because what do you say to that? That you're sorry for giving someone too much comfort? That love expressed in security and sacrifice had somehow backfired? He changed the subject quickly, but I caught the glint in his eye. He wasn't just reconnecting. He was taking inventory of skills, of knowledge, of what survival really meant. "How do you know when someone's lying?" he asked next. "Body language," I replied without hesitation. "Inconsistent eye contact. Breathing changes. Voice pitches up or down. Details don't line up." I poked the fire, watching embers rise like tiny red spirits. "Why?" "Just curious," he said. But the look he gave me wasn't curiosity. It was measuring, calculating. Later, when I crawled into my tent, Tyler offered to take first watch. "I want to enjoy the quiet," he said, zipping his jacket up to the collar. "Just sit with the sounds for a while." That, more than anything, put me on edge. Tyler had never shown the slightest interest in nature's quiet. Not once. He'd always been a noise and screens kind of kid, but I didn't object. I pulled my sleeping bag around me and closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the forest bleed through the thin nylon wall. For a while, I heard normal movement logs shifting, the fire being stoked. Then came silence. Not peace, not rest. The kind of silence that feels like something holding its breath. I laid there awake, not moving, every instinct in my body alert, listening for footsteps, for the scratch of rope, for the click of a rifle, but none came, just that oppressive stillness. Like someone waiting, like something about to begin. Dawn arrived without warning, bleeding through the nylon of my tent in a soft gray haze that didn't so much illuminate as expose. The air outside was frigid. March in Alaska never pretends to be gentle, but it wasn't the cold that woke me. It was motion. Quick, purposeful, metallic sounds. Equipment clanking, zippers unzipping with a kind of military precision Tyler had never once displayed in his life. I sat up slowly, muscles stiff from the night air, instincts already screaming something was off. I unzipped my tent, stepped into the frostbitten morning, and saw him by the truck. He was methodically packing gear rifle, food canisters, emergency beacon, GPS. Every survival item we'd brought was being loaded into the vehicle like it had never been unpacked. He didn't look up when I spoke. "What's going on?" My voice broke the silence like a tree snapping in the wind. Tyler flinched but didn't stop. "Change of plans," he muttered. "Weather's turning. We need to get out early." I scanned the sky, clear blue, no clouds for miles. A stillness in the air that only comes when the wilderness itself is watching. "Forecast was clear through Tuesday," I said flatly. "You checked it yourself?" He paused, just long enough to betray that he hadn't expected me to challenge him. "Better safe than sorry," he said, forcing nonchalance into his tone like someone painting over cracks in drywall. I walked closer. "Tyler, talk to me. What's really happening here?" That's when the dam broke. He turned to face me, and for a moment I saw the boy I'd raised. But it was just a flicker. What stood in front of me now was a man barely holding back years of pent-up resentment. "You want the truth?" he snapped. "Fine, I'm done. Done with your control, your judgment, your holier-than-thou lectures. You've spent my entire life pulling the strings, dangling your money like some kind of reward for good behavior. Guess what? I'm cutting the strings." My breath caught in my chest. "Tyler, I gave you everything." His face twisted. "No, you bought everything. You think throwing money at me was love? It was manipulation. You kept me dependent, made me weak, then looked down on me for not being strong." His fists were clenched, eyes shining with fury. "Well, not anymore. I'm taking control now. I don't want your allowances. I want what's mine. The shops, the house, the accounts, everything you've been hoarding like some bitter king guarding his gold." And then I saw it, truly saw it. This wasn't just about money. This was about power, about proving something. He'd come out here to end me, not just to inherit, but to win. "You're leaving me here," I said slowly, the words tasting like ash. "That's the plan." He didn't even flinch. 45 kilometers from the nearest road. No food, no gear, in Grizzly country. He nodded. "Maybe you'll survive. You're the great survivalist, right? Show me what all that Navy training's worth. Or maybe you won't. Either way, I walk away, free and rich." I stepped closer, a last-ditch plea rising in my throat. "Whatever I did wrong, we can fix this. Don't do this. You don't have to become this man." For a second, just a second, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps. Remorse, maybe. But then it was gone, buried beneath years of entitlement and bitterness. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. "Try not to meet the Grizzlies too quickly. I want you to have some time to think about what you created." The truck door slammed. The engine roared to life. I stepped forward instinctively, hand raised, but the wheels were already spinning, flinging dirt and snow in every direction. I caught one last look through the windshield. His face was stone, cold, unrecognizable. Then the truck vanished around a bend, the crunch of tires on frozen gravel fading until there was nothing left but stillness. Absolute stillness. I stood in the center of the clearing, alone, trying to comprehend what had just happened. My son, my flesh and blood, had sentenced me to death like it was a business transaction, not a murder of passion, a premeditated purge, for inheritance, for spite, for freedom. But shock is a luxury you can't afford when you're 62 years old, standing alone in sub-zero temperatures with nothing but the clothes on your back and a small folding knife you'd forgotten you kept in your jacket. My Navy training surged forward, pushing the pain down, pushing the fear back. First rule of survival: assess your resources. Second, evaluate your environment. Third, move. Standing still in Alaska, in March, is just a poetic way to freeze to death. I turned toward the trees, eyes scanning for tracks, terrain, patterns in the light. 45 kilometers back to the main road. Maybe more. No compass, no signal, no food, no water. My boots were already soaked through from last night's snow, but I wasn't dead yet. Tyler had miscalculated one thing. I wasn't a man who would lie down and die. I was a man who'd buried friends in combat, survived storms at sea, crawled through broken glass to save teammates. If he thought the wilderness would swallow me whole, he'd forgotten who taught him to read the land in the first place. And now, the teacher was about to show him the final lesson. You never leave a soldier behind, and you damn sure never leave one alive to come back. The forest closed around me like a mouth, branches crowding the narrow trail. Tyler and I had followed the day before. Only now there was no second set of footsteps beside me, just the weight of betrayal and the relentless bite of cold. I moved fast at first, adrenaline overriding the ache in my joints, the fog in my head, the firestorm of emotions still smoldering beneath my ribs. But within a few kilometers, the reality of my situation sank in. I had no pack, no map, no food, no water, and I was deep in one of the most unforgiving stretches of Alaskan wilderness. The snow was hard-packed in some places, slush in others. My boots meant for casual hiking, not for bare survival, were already soaked through. Every step sent cold, biting up my legs. I focused on breathing, not thinking. Thinking led to rage, to sorrow, to imagining the smug look on Tyler's face when he drove away, convinced he'd just pulled off the perfect, bloodless murder. But my body knew what to do, even if my heart hadn't caught up. Navy instincts kicked in like an old song remembered mid-March. Assess, prioritize, move. By mid-morning, I'd found an old game trail, narrow but worn enough that animals used it regularly. And animals meant water, possibly shelter. Possibly danger too, but in my position, risk was no longer a variable. It was the constant. The trail meandered west in roughly the direction I guessed the main road might lie, and I took it. I broke branches every few dozen steps, leaving markers. Not that anyone would come looking. Tyler wouldn't file a report for days, if at all, and even then he'd probably cry into the phone. I don't know what happened. I woke up and he was just gone. The thought nearly broke me. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. Hours passed. Hunger gnawed, then dulled. Thirst became the real problem. I found a frozen stream and cracked its surface with a sharp rock, using my hands like a cup. It wasn't clean, but survival doesn't ask for permission, it only demands obedience. By early afternoon, my muscles screamed with every step. My vision had started to tunnel, and the world felt less like Alaska and more like a memory of it, gray, distorted, thinning at the edges. That's when I heard it, the low hum of engines, faint but undeniably man-made. I froze, heart leaping like a startled deer. Sound travels strangely in forests, but I knew that rhythm: ATVs. Multiple. Moving slowly. A group, maybe a guided tour, or hunters. Maybe, if luck existed anymore, rescuers. I veered north toward the sound, moving as fast as my legs would allow. Branches whipped my face. My breath rasped like sandpaper in my throat. The hum grew louder, steadier, until finally I broke through a stand of thin spruce and stumbled into a clearing. 4 ATVs were parked in a loose semicircle. One man stood beside his vehicle, helmet in hand, beard streaked with gray, eyes sharp and weathered. He turned when he saw me emerge disheveled, bleeding, frostbitten, stumbling like a drunk. "Whoa, sir, you okay?" His voice was firm but kind, the kind you hear from someone who's pulled strangers out of snowdrifts before. I tried to speak, but my throat cracked. "My son," I croaked. "He left me, took the gear, drove off." The bearded man's expression darkened. He handed me a water bottle, which I drained like it was life itself. "I'm Richard Hale," he said, watching me carefully. "Used to be a ranger out here. These are my friends. What you're describing, that's not just abandonment. That's attempted murder." I nodded slowly, shame and fury colliding in my chest like two storms meeting at sea. "Name's David Martin. My son Tyler brought me out here. Said it was a bonding trip. Then he stripped the site and drove off with everything. Left me to die." Richard swore under his breath. The others, 2 men, 1 woman, looked equally horrified. "We're just finishing up a backcountry loop," Richard said. "But I know a shortcut, Old Ranger Trail. We can get you back to the Denali entrance in about 90 minutes. He looked at me squarely. "You want to call the authorities now, or?" I shook my head slowly. "Not yet. Not before I had a chance to look him in the eye. Not before I gave Tyler the gift he'd tried to take from me, finality." "Get me to the motel," I said. "I need to be there when he gets back." Richard understood immediately. "We'll take the trail. He'll never see us coming." The ride back was brutal frozen streams, fallen trees, switchbacks carved into rock and snow. But Richard handled the terrain like a man who knew every inch of it by heart. We didn't speak much, and I was grateful. I needed silence to steel myself for what came next. When we emerged onto the paved road, the Denali Lodge appeared like a dream. The truck wasn't in the lot. Tyler hadn't returned. Good. I still had time. As we pulled up to the cabins, Richard cut the engine and turned to me. "Sir, if you need a witness, I'll be one. If this goes to trial, I'll stand beside you." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Oh, it's going to trial," I said. "But first, I need to look my son in the eyes and show him exactly what he tried and failed to destroy." Back in the motel room, I stripped off my frozen layers, muscles stiff, skin raw from wind and brush. The heater kicked on with a groan, pumping dry warmth into the space that still smelled faintly of cedar and tourist cologne. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling not from exhaustion, but from the clarity that had crystallized somewhere between the howl of the trees and the rumble of Richard's ATV. I wasn't going to bury this. I wasn't going to let it pass as some private tragedy tucked behind a stoic silence. Number Tyler wanted a reckoning, and now he was going to get it, just not the one he imagined. The legal documents I'd folded and carried like a lifeline were still inside my jacket. I laid them out carefully on the motel desk, smoothing the pages with deliberate hands. The new will, notarized and ironclad. The business succession plan with Tyler's name nowhere in sight. The charitable trust paperwork for the Elaine Martin Legacy Foundation, ready to funnel every dollar of the fortune he tried to kill me for into scholarships, wildlife rehab, and veteran support. 3 weeks ago, these documents had felt like an act of tough love. Now, they felt like a final line of defense proof that I'd already closed the door before Tyler even tried to burn the house down. I called Richard. He picked up on the first ring. "You settled in?" he asked. "Ready," I said. "I need you here tonight. I want everything documented, his entrance, his reaction, every word that leaves his mouth." There was a pause on the line. Then Richard's voice came back steady. "You want it recorded for court?" "I want it recorded for clarity, for truth, for a jury, sure, but mostly for me." "Understood," he said. "I'll bring the equipment. I've got a DSLR that shoots 4 Kelvin and an audio rig that won't miss a whisper. I'll be there by 8. Use the adjoining room," I told him. "I've already reserved it under your name. Sight lines are clear through the connecting door. I'll set it up. And David, good move. People like him think they're playing chess. But you just flipped the board." By the time Richard arrived, dusk had dropped its weight over Denali like a curtain. The parking lot outside was quiet, lit only by dull amber lights that buzzed like old memories. We ran a full test camera positioned behind a suitcase on the bed in the next room, Mike tucked discreetly into the wall vent facing mine. Richard adjusted the lens with the care of someone who understood that this wasn't just documentation. It was defense. "When's he due?" he asked. I glanced at my watch. If he took the direct route and didn't stop for more than gas or a bite to eat, he'll be here before 9. At 8:47 p.m., I heard the gravel crunch of tires just outside the window. A door creaked open, then slammed. The low rumble of the rental truck's engine clicked off. Footsteps. A key fumbling at the door. I sat in the armchair facing the entrance, legal documents spread in front of me like weapons. The door opened. Tyler walked in, eyes already scanning the room, expecting absence, expecting victory. His mouth fell open when he saw me sitting there, alive, clean, waiting. "Dad?" he breathed, as if I were a ghost. I stood slowly. "Welcome back. How are you here?" His voice cracked around the edges. "I left you. You didn't have... You left me 45 kilometers into bear country with no food, no gear, no communication. I remember. My voice was level. I had nothing left to give him but truth. But you forgot something. I've survived worse." Tyler backed up half a step. "You don't understand. No," I cut in. "You don't understand. You think you're clever, Tyler. That you planned this out. That you'd be home playing the grieving son while I froze to death or got torn apart by something with claws. But you didn't count on one thing, me getting back before you." He looked at the papers on the desk, and that's when it happened. Panic overtook calculation. "What is this?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "My will," I said. "The new one. You inherit nothing. Not the shops, not the house, not a dollar. You can't do that." His voice sharpened, rising like a child denied candy. "I'm your son." "You were," I replied. "You stopped being that the moment you looked me in the eye and decided my life was worth less than my bank account." "Oh?" Tyler's composure cracked like glass under a hammer. "You did this to me. You created this. You kept me weak. You paid for everything, but never trusted me with anything." "You're right," I said quietly. "I enabled you. I mistook guilt for love. I paid for your comfort and excused your failures. But this was all you. I may have created a dependent son, but you tried to become a killer." He was sweating now, trembling, his whole body pulsing with panic. "Please, we can fix this. Just give me another chance." I walked to the door and placed my hand on the knob. "This was your chance, and you burned it down in the woods. Now all that's left is the truth, and the consequences that come with it." His voice followed me as I opened the door. "Where are you going?" "To call the police," I said. "Attempted murder doesn't go away just because it failed." As I stepped into the night, I heard him collapse into the chair behind me, the same chair I had sat in waiting for him, papers in hand, smile on my face. He thought he was writing my ending, but all he'd done was sign the beginning of his own. The Anchorage Police Department smelled like old paper and strong coffee, two things that always accompanied the slow machinery of justice. I sat across from Detective Paul Simmons, a lean man in his 50s with eyes like frost and a voice that didn't waste syllables. The metal table between us was stacked with evidence. Richard's high-definition video files, the audio recording of Tyler's unraveling monologue, my sworn statement, and the updated legal documents that proved premeditation. Simmons clicked through the footage in silence, only nodding occasionally, his jaw tightening as Tyler's voice filled the room, angry, bitter, naked with confession. When the last clip ended, he leaned back in his chair, exhaled through his nose, and said, "This is one of the cleanest cases of attempted parricide I've seen in 20 years. He planned it too well. That's going to be his downfall." I didn't respond. I just stared through the glass window where, on the other side, Tyler sat in handcuffs, waiting to be processed. His hair was messy, his hoodie wrinkled, his shoes still caked in the dirt of the trail he had driven away from so triumphantly. The swagger was gone. The mask was gone. All that remained was a boy who had finally run out of people to blame. Simmons cleared his throat. "We're filing for attempted murder in the first degree, reckless endangerment, and inheritance fraud. Alaska law treats wilderness abandonment the same as putting a gun to someone's head. In some ways, worse. You plan to get out of here tomorrow, is that right?" I nodded. Had a meeting with my attorney in the morning, finalizing the estate, cleaning up loose ends. Good, he said. Make sure that will stays bulletproof. People like your son, they don't stop just because they're in cuffs. They just look for loopholes. Outside, snow flurried lightly, softening the edges of the city. Richard waited by the exit, coat zipped high, cap pulled low. He handed me a thermos of hot coffee and a look of grim respect. He'll get time, he said. With what you've given them, minimum 15 years, maybe more. I took a sip and nodded. It's not about the sentence anymore. It's about the line. Drawing it clean. Final. Permanent. You going to visit him? Richard asked. The question landed with weight. I considered it, genuinely, but the answer had already rooted itself deep in my chest. The boy I raised, died out there in the snow. This is someone else entirely. We walked in silence to his truck. The cold didn't sting as much now. My blood had found its pace again, and my mind was already shifting gears toward the future. I wasn't going back to Seattle to reopen the past. I was going back to finish what I started. The foundation in Elaine's name, the scholarships, the animal rescue grants, a legacy not built on fear or control, but purpose. Tyler had brought me to Alaska to kill me for money, but all he'd done was burn the bridge to the only person who ever gave a damn. And me? I came back from the dead with clarity, with direction, with a story no one would believe except those who've stood in the fire and refused to be consumed. 3 days later, back in Seattle, I stood in my office surrounded by the quiet thrum of machines and the familiar scent of motor oil, a place that had once been the heartbeat of my ambition and now felt like the quiet aftermath of a war. The framed photo of Elaine still sat on the bookshelf, her smile forever frozen in a better time. I looked at her and whispered, "It's over." But the truth was, it wasn't. Not completely. Because that morning, a letter arrived, 5 pages of slanted handwriting and hollow remorse. It was from Tyler. The envelope was postmarked from the Anchorage Correctional Facility, and the moment I saw the return address, I knew what would be inside. Apologies dressed up as insight. Regret wrapped in manipulation. The words were predictable. I was confused. I didn't mean it. If you could just reconsider the will. There was no mention of attempted murder. No acknowledgement of leaving me to die. Just excuses, blame, and promises that prison would change him if only he had something to look forward to on the other side. Like an inheritance. I read it once, folded it neatly, then fed it into the shredder beside my desk. The sound of the blade slicing through those pages was strangely comforting, final, honest. Some relationships, I've learned, don't survive betrayal, not the kind that leaves footprints in the snow and silence behind a steering wheel. Tyler made a choice, and I made mine. Outside, the city moved on. Trucks rumbled past the shop. A pair of teenage boys were arguing over which wrench to use on an old Honda in Bay 2. Life, as it tends to do, had resumed. But mine wasn't going back to what it was. I wasn't going to measure my days by invoices or bank balances anymore. I had a foundation to build. A scholarship fund in Elaine's name was already in motion. I'd reached out to a local wildlife rehabilitation center and offered to match their next year's budget anonymously. Because that's what Tyler could never understand. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in numbers. It's who you lift while you're still here. I took one last look at my will, signed and sealed, locked it in the safe, then grabbed my jacket. Before I left the office, I turned off the light and paused in the doorway, soaking in the quiet. For the first time in years, I felt no guilt, no weight, no illusion that money could fix what love, trust, and time had failed to teach. Tyler brought me to Alaska to kill me for control, but instead he gave me something far more powerful: clarity, purpose, the freedom to finally stop saving someone who never wanted to be saved. And in letting go of him, I had finally remembered how to hold on to myself. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect, gasp, or sit in stunned silence, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here, we share powerful, thought-provoking narratives that explore the deepest corners of human behavior, stories of betrayal, redemption, survival, and strength. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us continue creating content that resonates, challenges, and stays with you long after the final word. If you've ever experienced a complicated family dynamic, if you've had to draw painful boundaries or rediscover your purpose after heartbreak, then you know these stories aren't just fiction, they're reflections of real struggles. And sometimes they remind us what we need to hear most. That clarity can come from chaos, and that choosing to protect yourself is not weakness, it's wisdom. So before you go, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell us in the comments what part of this story struck you the most. What would you have done? We read every comment. We listen. Because here, it's more than just storytelling. It's about building a space where people feel seen, challenged, and inspired. Thanks for watching. And remember, not all heroes wear capes. Some survive betrayal, walk through fire, and come back stronger. See you in the next story.